Alright folks, welcome back to Boss Economics World. Grab your double shot espresso, because today we're dissecting a story so wild, so dripping with irony, it makes the GameStop saga look like a simple lemonade stand transaction. The headline that's got every analyst from Wall Street to Shanghai hyperventilating? As of September 2025, President Xi Jinping's great export machine isn't just surviving the Trump tariff onslaught, it's thriving. We're talking a projected, record-shattering $1.2 trillion trade surplus for the year. Let that number sink in. $1.2 trillion. That's more than the entire GDP of Switzerland or Saudi Arabia. This, after 5 straight months of what were supposed to be crippling, economy-breaking US tariffs. The mainstream consensus, the PhDs and their ivory towers, all predicted China's growth would be sliced in half. They told you the dragon was wounded, cornered, ready to kneel. Well, it looks like the dragon just breathed $1 trillion fireball and set their forecasts ablaze. But here at Boss Economics, we don't just read the headlines. We read between the lines. We look at that spectacular, glittering number, and we ask the question nobody else is asking: is this the greatest story of economic resilience ever told, or is it the most magnificent, gilded symptom of a terminal disease? Let's get into it. So, how in the world did this happen? How did China stare down the barrel of a 145% tariff from its biggest customer and not just dodge the bullet, but seemingly get stronger? It wasn't magic. It was a brutal, ruthlessly efficient three-pronged strategy. First, the Global South Gambit. With the front door to America slammed shut, China didn't just knock on the back door, it blew out the walls of every other house on the block. The data is staggering. Indian purchases of Chinese goods hit an all-time high in August. We're not just talking cheap trinkets, we're talking high-value inputs. Shipments to Africa are on pace to smash all previous records. Sales to the ASEAN bloc have soared past their pandemic-era highs, a time when everyone was panic-buying everything. This isn't an accident. This is the culmination of a decade of the Belt and Road Initiative. China spent years building the ports, railways, and digital infrastructure. Now, it's cashing in, using those very channels to divert its tsunami of goods. They turned the global south from a secondary market into their primary release valve. While Washington was busy building a tariff wall, Beijing was building a global superhighway. Second, the value chain chokehold. This is where it gets really clever, folks. Take the India story. On the surface, it looks like a win for supply chain diversification. Apple, for instance, has aggressively shifted iPhone assembly to India. The headline screamed India steals China's manufacturing crown. But let's look under the hood. Where do the high-precision components, the proprietary camera modules, the sophisticated chipsets, and the billion-dollar tooling machines for those Indian factories come from? You guessed it. In July alone, Chinese firms shipped nearly $1 billion in semiconductors and billions more in phone parts to India. This is the genius of China's modern industrial strategy. They've allowed the low-margin, labor-intensive final assembly to migrate, a process they call shedding the low end. But they have maintained an iron grip on the high-value, high-tech core of the supply chain. So, India isn't replacing China, it's becoming China's largest, most sophisticated assembly workshop. For every iPhone that says assembled in India, the cash register still rings loud and clear back in Shenzhen and Suzhou. Third, the currency cushion. Let's not forget the silent weapon in any trade war, the exchange rate. The Chinese yuan, conveniently, has been weak. And with the Federal Reserve cutting rates earlier this month to prop up a slowing US economy, the dollar has weakened, dragging the yuan down with it against other major currencies like the euro. What does this mean in plain English? It means that for a buyer in Europe, Brazil, or Australia, Chinese goods are on a perpetual discount. Macquarie Bank's data shows the yuan's real effective exchange rate, a fancy term for its inflation-adjusted trade-weighted value, is at its weakest since 2011. A 15% tariff stings a lot less when your currency gives you a 10% discount from the get-go. So there you have it. A masterclass in geopolitical judo. China used its rivals' momentum against them, rerouting, embedding, and undercutting its way to a record surplus. A truly unstoppable force. Or is it? Now, if you're a consumer, this sounds fantastic. Cheap electric cars, 80-cent jeans, bargain electronics flooding the market. But if you're a government trying to protect your own domestic industries and the jobs of your citizens, you're in an impossible position. The world is experiencing a severe case of economic whiplash. The outcry is deafening. In Indonesia, viral videos of Chinese vendors on platforms like TikTok Shop touting their plans to flood Jakarta with ultra-cheap apparel caused a national panic. The trade minister had to publicly pledge action. Indian authorities are buried under an avalanche of 50 new applications for anti-dumping investigations in just the past few weeks. These aren't just whispers, they are screams of economic pain from local manufacturers being obliterated. So why isn't the whole world joining Trump's tariff party? Why the subdued response, as Christopher Better at Gapkel Dragonomics puts it? Because they are all caught in a geopolitical trap of Beijing's design. 1. The two-front war dilemma. Most of these countries, from the EU to Mexico, are already locked in tense, exhausting trade negotiations with the Trump administration. They're trying to avoid US tariffs on their own steel, cars, and agricultural products. Picking a new, massive trade war with China, the world's second largest economy, at the same time is political and economic suicide. It's like being in a boxing match and deciding to start a knife fight with a bystander. 2. The bargaining chip ploy. Some countries are likely holding back on China tariffs as a potential concession to the US. Imagine the Mexican trade negotiator, Mr. Trump, you want us to crack down on immigration? Well, how about this instead? We'll slap a 25% tariff on Chinese EVs, helping your auto industry. Now, can we talk about those steel tariffs you put on us? It's a cynical, but brilliant, piece of statecraft. 3. The dependency trap. This is the most critical factor. For over half the planet, China isn't just a competitor, it's their single largest trading partner. Cambodia's central bank governor, Chiasari, laid it bare with brutal honesty, we do import a lot from China. We also rely a lot in terms of foreign direct investment from China. You can't declare war on your biggest customer and your biggest investor. It's like trying to sue your boss who is also your landlord. So what we're seeing is a world treading on eggshells. South Africa sees its domestic car industry being hammered by a near doubling of Chinese auto imports, but its trade minister advises against tariffs, pleading for Chinese investment instead. Brazil makes noise about retaliation but then gives BYD, China's EV titan, a tariff-free window to set up local production. It's a global strategy of appeasement born of desperation. And this, folks, is where we peel back the curtain and reveal the ugly truth behind the spectacular $1.2 trillion figure. That surplus isn't a sign of robust health. It's a fever symptom. It's a sign of a deeply, fundamentally unbalanced and sick domestic economy. First, let's talk about profitless prosperity. While exports are surging, profits at China's industrial firms are actually falling down 1.7% in the first 7 months of 2025. How is this possible? It's simple. China is drowning in overcapacity. Years of state-directed investment, particularly in green tech, EVs, and batteries, combined with a catastrophic and prolonged property crash, have left it with factories that can produce far more than its own citizens can possibly buy. Xi's so-called anti-involution drive, meant to curb this cutthroat domestic competition, has failed. The only way for these companies to survive is to dump their products on the global market at any price, even near or below cost. They are chasing volume, not value. They are selling more and more just to keep the lights on and the workers employed. It's like a store owner marking every item down 90% and then bragging about his record-breaking sales numbers. Yes, the revenue is high, but the business is going bankrupt. This isn't a strategy for growth, it's a strategy for survival. Second, China is exporting its deflation dragon. This price slashing isn't just a business problem, it's a national economic crisis. China is on track for its longest, most sticky spell of deflation since it opened up in the 1970s. When you have massive overcapacity and weak domestic demand, prices fall. And when you dump those goods overseas, you are literally exporting your deflation to the rest of the world. Think about it. China is not just sending you a cheap BYD seal. It's sending you its economic problems, gift-wrapped with a bow. This puts immense downward pressure on prices globally, making it harder for central banks in other countries to manage their own economies and threatening the viability of their own industries. Third, this is the death of the rebalancing dream. For over a decade, everyone from the IMF to the US Treasury has urged Beijing to do one thing: rebalance its economy away from state-led investment and exports, and toward domestic consumption. Let the Chinese people spend and enjoy the fruits of their labor. This export explosion is the exact opposite of that. It's a doubling down on the old, broken model. It's an admission that they have failed to stimulate their own consumer. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been pleading with Beijing to make boosting the consumer the pillar of its next 5-year plan. But this $1.2 trillion surplus is Beijing's defiant answer: no. They are choosing the easy, familiar path of flooding the world with goods rather than undertaking the hard, painful structural reforms needed to empower their own households. This is a monumental strategic failure, papered over by a record-breaking trade number. So, what happens next? This unstable equilibrium cannot hold. For Xi Jinping, this is a moment of perceived strength. He's going into a high-stakes meeting with Trump and South Korea holding what looks like a royal flush. He can claim that China doesn't need the American consumer, that his model is resilient. The surplus is a geopolitical weapon, a massive show of defiance. But the world is waking up. The pressure cooker is reaching its limit. Trump is already leaning on NATO allies to impose tariffs of up to 100% on China over its support for Russia. This isn't just about trade anymore, it's about geopolitics and security. If he succeeds in corralling a coalition of the concerned, China could find itself facing not just a US tariff wall, but a global one. As Arthur Krober notes, Chinese exporters are incredibly competitive and have found workarounds. But even they cannot survive a coordinated, global blockade. The strategy of localizing production, like BYD in Brazil or countless suppliers in Mexico, may be the only escape hatch. But that, over time, means exporting China's factories, capital, and jobs, hollowing out its own industrial base in the long run. So, when you see that headline, China's unstoppable $1.2 trillion surplus, I want you to remember what we discussed here today. This isn't a story of triumph. It's a story of desperation. It's the flashing indicator light of a domestic economy in a deep, deflationary spiral. It's the byproduct of a failed economic model that prioritizes state production over household prosperity. It's a nation running faster and faster on an export hamster wheel, just to stay in the same place. That $1.2 trillion surplus isn't a trophy. It's the loudest, most spectacular economic cry for help the world has ever seen. This isn't a victory lap, folks. It's a distress flare, fired from the heart of the world's factory, signaling that the engine is overheating, and the entire global system is at risk of going down with it. What do you think? Is this China's masterstroke, or its last gasp? Is the world right to be cautious, or is it enabling a global economic crisis? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Stay sharp out there.